question session. And next presenter, I'm inviting Dr. Charito Medina, consultant and founding member, MASIPAG, Philippine. His topic on climate change and adaptation challenge, very interesting topic. I am requesting Dr. Charito Medina to complete the presentation within 30 minutes. It will be better for us to manage the time. Thank you. Dr. Charito Medina.
Thank you, Dr. Shahidul Islam. My name is Charito Medina. I'm from the Philippines, facing the Pacific Ocean. My activities are more on the lowlands, but still, my topic today is about climate change and it affects whether lowland or upland. I am understand and I will be conscious that we are talking about mountain ecosystems in this summer field school. So the topic assigned to me is our challenges in climate change, both in adaptation as well as in mitigation. I have not listened to the earlier presenters except for Dr. Yu Ching Song. So I will, I might, if I repeat some of them just for clarity and context of my presentation. Before I proceed, the outline of my presentation will be, of course, it's very simple thing. I'll give you some the introduction, key concepts and definitions. Then go into the center of my presentation about adaptation challenges and mitigation challenges, and I will offer a way forward. The objectives of the session are to discuss the challenges in adaptation, as well to explain the challenges and dominant mitigation approaches to climate change. To contextualize what I'm going to say, I would like to describe that this global climate change I have a the distraction here. There's the global climate change scenarios. Is that the problem is even without reduction of the emissions right now, still by the end of the century or by the end of the 2100 year, that is about 80 years or 79 years from now, there will still be an increase by 2.5 to 7% as to 7 degrees centigrade. So this is a very uncomfortable situation. And in fact, the baseline is that 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2040 should be the safer level that we should allow to be increasing in our temperature. And yet, there is already 2 degrees centigrade. A 2 degrees centigrade increase in temperature is predicted to be irreversible and potentially catastrophic impacts in which societies as well as ecosystems will not be able to adapt. So that our reference, of course, is always the pre-industrial level or the before the industrial revolution that started in Europe, specifically Great Britain, because that was the time when the internal combustion engine was used and the start of the use of burning coal as well as fossil fuel that had significantly contributed into the anthropogenic causes of accumulation of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. If the present day concentrations of greenhouse gases were held constant, still there is an expected 0.6 degrees centigrade to be emerging by 2100 because of the greenhouse gases that are still staying in the atmosphere, because many can have about even 100 years of length of stay in the atmosphere for some of these greenhouse gases. in 2020, one of the 3 warmest years on record, the average temperature was already 1.2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial baseline, according to the World Meteorological Organization. It means to say that if it is 1.2 an average already, then 1.5 means an increase of 0.3 degrees centigrade by 2040 is something only the comfortable increase that is allowable. If it increases up, it reaches 2 degrees centigrade, ecologists would say that the potential catastrophic impact is inevitable. So these are realities that we have to contend with. This has a bearing also as a challenge later on in my presentation. Of course, to give you an overview of the climate change that it brings to us, typhoons or cyclones, I think in the mountain ecosystems, especially in Central Europe, there's no typhoon, perhaps they're in the mountainous areas. Cyclones to some extent, but there are, of course, fire, high temperature, heat waves maybe, droughts, flooding, saltwater intrusion only occurs in coastal areas, especially in archipelago or beside the sea, of course. But erratic weather is occurring everywhere. And this is one of the things that is problematic because we cannot predict when it happens, especially. Pests and diseases, landslides are prevalent in mountain ecosystems. Seawater rise are in low-lying areas in beaches or near oceans or seas. Forest fires are prevalent in mountain ecosystems in many places, especially in drier areas. Many of these would cause crop failure, and if there is crop failure repeatedly or in wide scale, food crisis might happen. But in fact, beyond that, there is more complex impact of climate change, that the climate change can affect the physical systems. I have already mentioned the crop yields, biological and seasonal cycles that will affect the economy, infrastructure, income, and growth of economy. And this affects everyone from the micro level, from the individual to family to communities and nations, countries. At the individual level, there are big human impacts that can happen. Thermal stress, injuries, infectious disease, malnutrition, mental health, conflict. In fact, for example, in human health, more rainfalls can create the incidence of more mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can transmit more diseases like dengue fever and malaria and other things, and this can cause more health issues or problems. So it's a complex one. Now, before I proceed to the challenges, let me mention, I don't know if this had been defined already, but for clarity, climate change resilience is actually the overall ability to deal with different types of hazards under changing conditions in climate change, and it lowers vulnerability and increases capacity to return to pre-disaster situation in a timely, efficient, and equitable manner. Meaning, if there is an effect, it goes back to normal as soon as possible. The ability to go to normal is a resilient attribute. So the faster and despite repeated stress of the ecosystems, if it goes back to normal, then there is more resilience to that, because we are dependent on ecosystems to provide our life support systems, our food systems that provides livelihood as well as nourishment to all of us. What is climate change? Besides resilience, what is climate change adaptation? That is The center of my presentation is climate change adaptation challenges. So the adaptations are actually adjustments in nature or human activities in response to climate change or their effects, which moderates harm or enhance the beneficial opportunities. So adaptation are just the uh, adjustments in order to mitigate or no, sorry, in order to address and be able to adapt to effects of climate change. But in adaptation, let me mention that planned adaptation usually is our government programs because they are the deliberate policy decisions in response to climate change. And these are, for example, the structures, infrastructures being built like evacuation centers, market roads, bridges, irrigation canals and dikes and things like that. But autonomous adaptation are independent actions by people and organizations in response to climate change. So in this case, this autonomous adaptations are more important because these are the more meaningful activities that can address the needs of people being directly affected by the adverse impacts of climate change. I would like to mention also a more detailed another dimension of adaptation. We call it no regrets adaptation, and this are sub-element of autonomous adaptation by people. And it says no regrets, meaning people have to do it. Usually these are part of agricultural practices. But even if the adverse effects of climate change doesn't occur, it is still beneficial because, let's say, diversifying farming system, even without climate change, then still the farmers can have additional or better income or general costs of no regret adaptation are relatively cheaper. Mitigation, on the other hand, is to reduce the emission and increase sequestration or the sink of greenhouse gases directed towards global warming. I think I will not elaborate much on this basic definitions or concepts, but to complete the terminologies about climate change, the disaster risk reduction, as it says, is these are actually used or practiced to minimize risk and disaster. And these are usually done by mostly by governments. Some NGOs do this also, but they do some mapping, identify disaster areas, monitor disaster risk, and other things. Now, before I proceed to the challenges, I would like to mention some adaptation strategies at the farmer level. So these are practical that can be done by farmers directly and immediately without much cost. So use biodiversity in order to spread the risks of the damage of climate change. The farmers or indigenous people, mountain people, secure their own resources. They own the seeds, like Dr. Rishing Chong has mentioned in her presentation. Farmers doing some farmer breeding, things like that. So that is a good positive adaptation of farmers, as she also has mentioned as an example. Reducing exposure to economic risks, that is minimizing the costs of production, so that if there is damage, there is no loss on the cost of production, only on the labor cost of the agricultural activities. Diversifying livelihood and sources of income, using and conserving available natural resources. Survival crops. In the Philippines, we have lots of natural calamities. In fact, we are number 3 in terms of the natural risk to calamities. And survival crops are important, meaning root crops or tuber crops, as well as banana, that can be eaten while there is no food as damaged by the typhoon and the government support has not arrived yet. The people has to fill their stomach, and they need some survival crop available to them. So root crops as survival crops are important. Usually they're non-traditional crops, but they provide important adaptation strategy. Not so many people mention that organizations or social solution is also important, banking on the local knowledge or indigenous knowledge. Now, the focus of my presentation are the challenges to adaptation. The first one that I have identified is that the manifestations and impacts of climate change are complex and stochastic. Stochastic means unpredictable, or they come in chances. So we cannot tell when it comes, and therefore any adaptation is difficult to set or put in place, because we are not sure when it comes. If there are some climate patterns, even climate patterns are changing now. So that's why it's called climate change, or seasonal pattern, I should say. For example, the adaptation to drought or forest fires is different from storms or flooding, and the adaptation or solutions are different, and therefore communities would be challenged on what kind of adaptation they should put in place. Number two challenge is that adaptation requires investment, which is not available among rural people. So that's the challenge. To do adaptation, you do some investment, you do some diversification. You want to acquire some livestock as an adaptation strategy. But if you want livestock, you have to buy them. And if the people there in the rural people areas don't have much money to buy all of these inputs into the farm, so that this is a challenge, really. The lack of capital of people to purchase additional components of their farm as adaptation to climate change. Number three, poor rural people are busy producing food on daily basis or short-term basis, and they have not much time to plan and implement long-term adaptation strategies. So that's the problem. They're busy and they're worrying for the next food, for the following day and for the week. And adaptation to climate change are requiring more planning, more resources. And in that case, people don't put much attention if these are requiring much resources and much time to do this, because they have to survive on the daily basis, as I said. So these are challenges. Number four, the government programs being planned adaptation, as I said, these infrastructures are of less direct impacts on farmers' adaptation, because farmers' adaptation immediately, as I said, they need to eat today, tomorrow, and a dike or a evacuation site will not feed them. And so these are problems that makes some farmers indifferent sometimes if they don't understand the broader adaptation concept and framework of such activities. Number five, challenge to adaptation. Science and technology in food systems and food production is predominantly for productivity and need to enhance adaptive and resilient dimensions. So most of the agronomic developments are designed to produce higher yield. But what we need more to incorporate as parameters or criteria for developing new varieties, new kinds of crops, are their adaptiveness and resilience to the challenges of climate change. Number six, challenge to adaptation. Science and adaptations need to be translated into policy, and policy is usually at the government, mostly national level or provincial level, and in turn the policy has to be turned into programs of action, or sometimes the policy is turned into a program and the program has turned into action. So this kind of thing takes several steps, and it takes a longer time to reach the people, to the farmers or indigenous people, especially in the mountains. So these are challenges that we need to consider, and we need to develop approaches in order to address these challenges so that we can have higher chances of success in implementing adaptation by mountain people. The last challenge to adaptation that I have listed here, although there are many more that can be done as I can be identified as adaptation, but the most challenge to adaptation is that adaptation is possible only up to a certain level of global warming. That is 1.5 degrees centigrade increase by from the pre-industrial level, or maximum maybe of 2 degrees centigrade, because a critical or tipping point temperature, that is the time when ecosystem structures and ecosystem services can no longer bounce back, or they don't have any more resilience, climate change, there will be no already problem. And therefore, if that tipping point of the global warming occurs, no amount of adaptation is effective. So in this case, we really need to push for an active, effective mitigation of climate change. The problem is there are also mitigation challenges. So the mitigation aspect, I will share to you some mitigation aspects or strategies. But of course, there are so many mitigation strategies also. But at the farm level, and effective at the farm level, conservation of forests and trees is an effective mitigation. As I said a while ago in the earlier slides, mitigation is how to do activities to reduce the emission or available greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that is causing climate change and global warming more specifically. So conserving forests to minimize deforestation, because deforestation on the average contributes about 15 to 18% of greenhouse gases. GHG means greenhouse gases. Organic farming practice has been documented to be an effective mitigating strategy, because you capture more carbon into the soil, and there is longer residence time of the carbon into the soil. So instead of that carbon compounds, carbon dioxide and its other compounds are instead of being in the air, if it is in the soil, then it can minimize the emission of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and therefore a mitigation to climate change. Organic farming can fix 2 to 4 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per hectare per year. So that's the potential of organic farming. Stopping using nitrogen chemical fertilizers, because nitrogen chemical fertilizers can produce nitrous oxide and 2O, and nitrous oxide is about 300 times global potential to carbon dioxide. It means that one molecule of nitrous oxide is equivalent to 300 carbon dioxide in terms of its greenhouse gas equivalence. So that nitrogen chemical fertilizer should be minimized if we wanted to minimize the emission of greenhouse gases in the form of nitrous oxide. Local markets for shorter food mileage. Dr. Yi-Ching Song also mentioned about local markets as an adaptation to climate change. Now, the major challenges that the market-based mitigation are not effective, because they are allowing continued use of fossil fuel rather than switching to renewable energy. So that the better mitigation should be really putting more emphasis on the alternatives to fossil fuel, and energy should be coming from renewable, maybe solar panels, wind turbines, and things like that. The dominant mitigation perspective is the green economy. developed, I think, in the Rio Summit, but these are business-oriented. Biofuels, climate-smart agriculture or GMOs, reduction of emission due to deforestation and carbon trading, the geoengineering, that is fertilizing the oceans with iron or nitrogen, the limiting substances to grow algae, that this algae can capture more carbon dioxide from the air because they photosynthesize uh, and phytoplanktons, and so things. But there are problems because it can create the blooming of non-beneficial microorganisms, and it can also uh, be detrimental to the ecosystems and the seas or oceans. Deep sea carbon dioxide injection and crop insurance, specifically in biofuels, to produce ethanol as a biofuel that is produced from corn or maize, maize or from sugarcane, producing ethanol from plants, maize or sugarcane requires about 30% more fossil energy because in planting maize or sugarcane, you also have to cultivate the land using fossil fuel, you irrigate the land, you harvest the land with machines, you process it with machines, you make the ethanol with machines, you distribute with machines. So there is more energy used in that production of biofuels. So there's a problem there. And biofuels can increase soil erosion by about 33%, even up to 200%, depending on the region and the slope and the type of soil. And biofuels displaces food production and local people. I will elaborate more on that. Climate change and smart agriculture or GMOs, genetically modified organisms, although this is also an adaptation, GMOs, that it promotes uniformity and monoculture and susceptibility to pest in the long run. And it is dependent on chemical inputs. Therefore, it is not dependent and sustainable, and it is not ecologically sound. The clean development mechanism.
Dr. Charito Medina, you have 3 more minutes.
Okay,
please.
thank you. The clean development mechanism, the reduction of emission due to deforestation, and plus means it can be planting of new trees. The tree plantations for and agrofuels, the challenges is that it displaces indigenous people in the place where these tree plantations are being planted. It competes with food production in terms of the area being planted to food rather than into plantations rather than food, and monoculture plantation usually is used. Carbon trading is a license to pollute, and this is a problem. The carbon trading to organic farmers, something is they're only paid something like in Africa, they're paid only about $2 per hectare per year, and the consultant to assess how much carbon is being assessed can be multiples of that amount, maybe 50, 100, things like that, much higher than the farmer. So it's not a beneficial thing. In fact, carbon trading is a license to pollute. It doesn't reduce the emission globally. So the market-based mitigation approaches perpetuate climate injustice. Market-based mechanisms are ineffective solutions and are exacerbating the problem. Those who contribute the least emissions per capita suffer most of the impacts of climate change. The small island states, women, youth, coastal people, local communities, indigenous people, mountain people, fisher folks, and the elderly are and the poor are disproportionately affected. Genuine mitigation is important, and the how to cool the planet, we need as an alternative to this, as I said, we need low carbon society, agroecology, organic, diversified. We need farmers control of the agriculture. We need to shift from industrial food chains to local food webs and systems. We need also to look at this in terms of climate justice, using the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities, that all countries have an obligation to address climate change, but each country should be guided by the extent of such efforts and thus simultaneously addressing inequalities, that the historical polluters must have bigger mitigation roles than those who are small scale polluters. Beyond climate change, the needs of the most vulnerable sector and communities must be addressed. The way forward, stop chemical farming, especially urea, nitrogen, to avoid emission of nitrous oxide, which is very greenhouse gas effective. Support local initiatives for resilience to climate change with and by farmers. We demand climate justice and demand climate emergency, meaning we cannot wait. We must act now. For this is an issue of human survival, not survival of anyone, but for the human species, for everyone. So in conclusion, or finally, I would like to mention, I think this was mentioned by one great scientist. He said, you cannot solve the problem with the same kind of thinking that created the problem. And business as usual is no longer an option. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Charito Medina, for your nice presentation on climate change and adaptation challenges. I forget the chair, there have no question session. Actually, question you can ask in Google. There have